Head, right top of our head, very first
Right?
frame.
Yeah. Just keeping it real.
We got real people in here, people.
You didn't expect that, did you?
Yeah. I wasn't sure what to expect. Talking about convention, and some people's eyes, light up, and then other people they rather go to sleep.
Lays on
That's
the-
right. Yes. Like So anyway, doesn't matter. It's I think it's just something important, and I mentioned that on Sunday. I think that's important. We'll get to that in just a second as people are tuning in, as they are settling in, whether it's live or in person. Let me say welcome if you're watching, and welcome to those of y'all who are in the room. While people are settling in, let me just kind of go over a few things that happened on this particular date that I thought were interesting. Maybe you do or do not. But first of all, on this date, June the 21st, which is the longest day of the year, right? Most sunlight on a day on this date. So now the days will keep getting shorter and shorter from here on out I guess till December the 21st. But anyway, a couple of birthdays to share with you. First of all, in 1832, happy birthday to Joseph Rainey. Anybody know who Joseph Rainey is? Joseph Rainey was the first African American in the U.S. House of Representatives. He served from 1870 to 1879, which I got to thinking about just how remarkable that is, because that would have been, I guess the Civil War ended in 64, right? When in 64? 65? So just 5 years later. That's pretty good. So step forward. He was out of Georgetown, South Carolina, so I'm assuming he served for the state of South Carolina. I don't really know. But anyway, he died in 1887, which means he was only 55 years old when he died.
Wow.
In my mind, that's a very young individual.
Yes, it is.
Seeing how that's how old I am. But anyway, also on this date, 1907, William Shea, which means nothing to you if you don't watch baseball. If you do watch baseball, he was a lawyer. Well, even if you don't watch baseball, he was still a lawyer. And the New York Mets play in Shea Stadium. It was named after him. But anyway, he was born in New York City, died in 1991. Also, for you younger folks, 1979, if you ever watched Jurassic World, today is Chris Pratt's birthday. He was born in Minnesota, and he's given some great speeches in the name of Jesus. So, kind of interesting. I don't know what his lifestyle is like if it backs it up, but anyway, it's cool to hear him say it. And then if you watch golf, 1996, on this date was born Scotty Scheffler. You may not know who that is. It doesn't really matter. He's a golfer. He's a professional golfer. He just so happens to be the number one golfer in the world right now, according to the statistics. So anyway, happy birthday to him. On this date, a couple of deaths, 1527, Machiavelli, if you know that name, an Italian statesman. He died on this date. He was only 57 years old. And then 1988, speaking of stadiums, Bobby Dodd. Y'all know Bobby Dodd Stadium in Atlanta. Georgia Tech plays there. He died on this date, and he was only 79 years old. The only thing good about that stadium is that it's right across the street from the varsity. But anyway. I know we got some Georgia Tech fans. Maybe you're watching. Apologize. Events. Let's see. I just got four and a half things I want to share with you that took place on this date that I thought were interesting. 1788. This really ought to mean something to us. In 1788, on this date, the U.S. Constitution actually went into effect because New Hampshire became the 9th state to ratify it. So it needed 9 states, got them, and went into effect. Also on this date, 1879, infielder William White played one game for a Major League Baseball team. What makes that significant was he then became the first African American to play in the Major League Baseball, in MLB. And the reason is, there was still a lot of severe racism then, but he appeared Caucasian. They didn't know that he was black, and so he becomes the first African American to play Major League Baseball. 1893, the first Ferris wheel opens in Chicago. I don't know if you like those or not. They kind of give me the heebie-jeebies, but I do it anyway. And then kind of this is a down note, but it's the last thing I got. I could have come up with something else, I guess. But 1989, the Supreme Court ruled that it was okay to burn the American flag as political expression. And then, interestingly enough, the very next year, 1990, on the same date, the U.S. House of Representatives voted to ban the burning of the American flag, but it failed. So, anyway. All right. Now, the reason we're here tonight is to talk about the Georgia Baptist Convention. Somebody says, whoa, I mean the Southern Baptist Convention. Somebody might say, well, that's a sleeper. I hope it's not a sleeper. I don't want to put anybody to sleep. I just think it's important for us to know as a Southern Baptist Church what is going on in the Southern Baptist Convention. And so I wanted to give a report on that. This will be the last time that we will meet on Wednesday night until the second Wednesday night in August. So that's about 6 weeks of lag time there, just because we know people are going in a million different directions on Wednesday nights. And so, but I did want to keep it going up until this point. I knew I'd be attending the convention last year in person, last week in person, and wanted to be able to have this time to be able to report to you. So whether you're here in person, whether you're watching live, or whether you're watching as a recording, this is going to be just my vantage point of Lane Sanders. You talk to somebody else, there are going to be a few other things that stuck out to them in one way or another, and that's okay. I mean, you know, you look at the Gospels; they have different stories that they tell, different ways that they tell it. But this is just kind of my account, and I do at least hope that this will be given a little bit more weight than somebody who wasn't there and reporting on it, which you have a lot of that. Everybody on Twitter has an opinion, right? And you know, they give their own blogs and all that kind of stuff. But in fact, I would even go so far as to say, when it comes to the convention like our convention, a large one like that, even if you're watching it online, there is just a different feel. And that may not sound like much, but a feel really does matter. It's just a lot different than being there, than watching it on, yeah. You know what I'm saying, there as opposed to not. So here's how things went down. First of all, it was in New Orleans, which is the home of seminary where I graduated from with my master's. Got a little ring right here to prove it. And but it was held at the Ernest N. Morial, I guess is how you say that name, his last name, Convention Center there in New Orleans, which just so happens, and I knew there was something up about it. As soon as I walked in the very first time, I knew something was up. It is the longest convention center in North America. And you feel listen, when you come in from the side, from the parking lot, which is right, if you're familiar with New Orleans, right next to the Riverwalk, you go in that side thing, and it is halfway down, but before you get to that halfway point, your Apple Watch is already saying, hey, are you taking a walk? Would you like for us to record this for you? You know? It is long, and it just keeps on going past that. It's just crazy long, but that is where it was held, and so right there on Riverwalk, right there next to the Mississippi River, and so obviously it was flooded in 2005 with Katrina. That's where it was held. There were about 12,700 and some odd messengers. Now, messengers are official representatives of the churches that make up the Southern Baptist Convention. They're simply called messengers, and those are the ones who are allowed a vote. They are people who are approved by the church that they come out of, and when they get there, they're given ballots, they register, and all that kind of stuff. And probably in attendance, the largest attendance, I know it got as high as a little over 18,000 at one given time in one of the sessions. And so I don't know how steady that was. It may have just been for the hotbed topic that I'll share with you in just a little bit. But anyway, so it just kind of gives you the idea of the size and the scope. It is certainly larger than last year's convention. Last year we had it was a little over 9,000 messengers and over 12,000 in attendance. But that was because it was on the edge of the country. It was in Anaheim last year. So kind of being a little bit more centrally located, you're going to draw a bigger crowd. And so yeah, that's kind of how things were. Now, before I tell you the different things that stood out to me, I am going to go ahead and make this offer. If you're watching online, and I see we got several people who are, if you have questions about what took place at the convention, okay, you can go ahead and begin to type those in right now. Now, I won't answer it until I'm finished talking about what I'm talking about, so that I might go ahead and answer it, but by then, you know, you might have forgotten or whatever the case. Go ahead and begin to type those in, and if I answer it in the middle of what I'm talking about, we'll skip over it. But I want to be able to answer any questions that you might have. And for those of you who are in the room, if you have any questions about what took place, go ahead and get them in your minds. You might want to write them out or whatever, and we'll cover those as soon as I finish with what I have. And then the last, I guess, introductory remark that I have is that I did not, in any form or fashion, rehearse this. So we might be finished in 10 minutes, or we might be finished in 45 minutes. I don't know. I'm pretty sure it won't be more than 45, unless y'all have a lot of questions that need to be answered. But yeah, let me just share with you a few things the few of the highlights that took place. Some of those were positive, and some of them were not. So first thing I'm gonna point out was positive. In fact, I think I'll probably just start out with the two most positive things that I experienced while I was there. First of all, and this is one of the things that you can't sense if you're not there or if you're just watching it online, and that is that it was a fairly uneventful convention. Now, I would not have gone and used the church resources, had I known that it was, well, no, I did need to be there for the things that did happen. But overall, it was very uneventful, and that's a good thing. It means that there was just a lot of reporting and those kinds of things, and not a lot of fighting, not a lot of problems that arose. And so, in that light, it was uneventful, and that's something to praise God for. Now, for someone who's only going to follow this in social media, that's probably a different story, because it doesn't matter how unified it may have been in the room, it doesn't matter how positive it may have been in the room, somebody's got to grab headlines or come up with their own, interpretation or whatever to try to, garner attention and all that kind of stuff. And so I can't speak to what was done online and all that kind of stuff. I just know that in the room, by and large, it was an uneventful few days, and I mean that in a good way. Now, what happens is when you come in, it's a typical convention. You're going to have business, you're going to have worship, you're going to have preaching, you're going to have resolutions, you're going to have people standing at the mic making suggestions, you're going to have debate going back and forth. It's just everything that you think of in a convention. It just has to be done by Robert's Rules of Order to the T, because you're talking about 18,000 people in a room. And so, and by the way, those rooms were huge. They had a ton of TVs, going all through them so you could see what was going on. I on purpose sat toward the back because there was just more room, more room to spread out and all that kind of stuff. And up on the stage, those people looked like ants up there, but you could see it on the screen right in front of you. But it was really easy to follow, and things were good in that way. And then in the very first session, the sessions were broken up. You had a morning session and afternoon session, and the very first session was probably the highlight of the convention, because it really marked most what the Southern Baptist Convention is all about. And what that moment was, it was a time, it probably took 30 to 40 minutes, and it was the commissioning of 79 new missionaries by the International Mission Board. In other words, these are people who had gone through training in Virginia, and they had gathered there, they had gone through their training, and now they were being sent out all around the world. And one of the things that might be interesting to those of you who are in Savannah, of course, obviously anybody in the convention, it's a worldwide thing, so anybody could hear this and hear what I'm saying, but specific to those of us who are in Savannah, you may or may not have known that it wasn't too long ago that the pastor at Bull Street Baptist Church resigned from that church so that he could do mission work. And he was actually one of the missionaries that was presented, one of the 79, he and his wife, two of the 79 that were presented as missionaries. And it just so happens, it's funny because there are a lot of our missionaries who are going into very dangerous places throughout the world. And when they are presented, they are shadowed out so that nobody sees their face. One of these governments, because the governments are watching this, I mean, they are keeping tabs on what's going on within the convention and others. And so their faces were shadowed out so that they would not be known who they are. But it had Bull Street Baptist, and so I knew who it was. But so anyway, that was a very positive, because that is what our convention ultimately is to be about. Let's see. Something else that was neither here nor there, it just was, and that was the election of the Southern Baptist Convention president. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with Southern Baptist polity or organization, how it works, normally someone who is elected as president, they serve technically a one-year term, but they usually go into the second term unopposed, and they serve a second term. That's not really how it went this year. There was a president who was elected last year. Bart Barber was his name, and he is out of, I think he's out of Texas. He's in a church in Texas, and it's a mid-sized church. It's bigger than ours, but it's not what you would call a mega church. And he was elected president. But then Mike Stone opposed him this year. When I say opposed, ran against him this year, which is not protocol, but it's also not unheard of. He is a pastor here in Georgia, in Blackshear, Georgia, and he just had some concerns that he was not sure were being addressed correctly, and so he decided to put his name in the hat. And Bart Barber retained the presidency. He won. He had 69% of the vote. Mike Stone had 31% of the vote, and then the remaining votes were either invalid or maybe there was a write-in. I don't know. I know there were about 25 of them or so that were invalid. So anyway, so Bart Barber is going to serve a second term, as is customary, as the president of the Southern Baptist Convention. Now, that leaves two other issues that really became the major topics that drew the most attention and that would probably be of most interest to you in here, because a lot of it is reports on what's going on in our seminaries and those kind of things, which are important, but those are things that you can listen to on your own. But issues that we're facing that I think are important, and really the reason that I felt it was necessary for me to be there. The first one was the follow-up to the sexual abuse reports that came out and were so explosive last year. Those reports came out a little over a year ago, a couple months prior to the convention in Anaheim, and became a major issue going into that convention. That became a topic really 2 years ago when it was told when the convention decided to, and there's a lot of fanfare behind this. That if you want the history behind it, I'll give it to you. But in that convention 2 years ago, they decided to bypass the normal progression of things within the convention and get a third party to come in and do an extensive investigation into how, not into specific allegations against people higher up in the convention, but how allegations were being handled by a lot of the people that held important positions within the convention. And so last year that report was produced after the report of the investigation was produced prior to the convention. So the convention they decided they wanted to put together a sexual abuse task force. That was one of the ways that they were going to answer that. And that sexual abuse task force, their job was to decide how are we now going to respond to what was brought out in that report, and what are we going to do about it going forward. And so that was one of the main things that I wanted to go to hear, and to make sure that we were moving in a direction that was positive for us. So The Sexual Abuse Task Force update was was what I thought was going to be a pretty big moment in our convention. Strange thing is that it really was not a big moment. Not because it wasn't important. It's because the report was just that from the Sexual Abuse Task Force. It was just that. It was a report that lasted, and a couple of different people came to the podium to share from the task force, came to share different issues, different ways that they were going to address it. But really, the report lasted maybe 15, 20 minutes, something like that. I mean, let's just say it even lasted 30 minutes. 30 minutes over the expanse of the whole convention was really just not very much. And there wasn't a time of discussion because there wasn't anything to discuss. They were to give a report, and that's what they did, and then we moved on. And so, just to share with you a couple of things, though, but that doesn't mean that it's not being addressed. It is being addressed. It just wasn't discussed. That's all, which is fine, totally fine. They're doing their job, and so a couple of things that were brought forward that I thought that you might want to know. First of all, one of the ways that they are addressing this issue of how is the convention going to handle these things. There was the creation of a website that was used to educate and guide churches. Used to educate churches on policies and procedures, what you can look out for, prevention, what happens when it does happen in your church, and those kinds of things. And so there's a website that is dedicated specifically for that, and they're still making improvements and changes and all that kind of stuff, and that'll be an ongoing thing probably for as long as it exists. But it's a resource for churches to look to. And, of course, in times like that, I'm thinking for us at Emmanuel Baptist Church, and I don't know about the people who are watching, what churches they're involved in, because I don't know who all it is, but I can tell you that here at Emmanuel, that as we were talking about those things, that we really need to show appreciation to what Andrew has done for us here at Emmanuel, because it was pre-COVID that he began this process of putting together a team. That team put together policies and procedures for prevention and for response to sexual abuse and physical abuse all the way around. I mean, we put, he had Richard Duke came and helped us put windows in every single door. We have the policies and procedures that were brought before our church and has been agreed upon, voted on, and all those kind of things. And at the time, people are looking at it and they're saying, we don't have a problem. Why does this matter? Now we know. Now we know. If you wait till it matters, you've waited too late. And so we really got ahead of the game. And so thank Andrew for doing that for us. But anyway, there's that website that will help. And then there was another response that they had, a thing that they're working on, is the creation of a database. And on that database, and I mentioned this last year because they had already said that they were going to, and so they're working through it now. The database is a list of those within the convention of individuals and churches who have been credibly accused of sexually abusing someone. Now, that part has created a little bit of, well, not a little bit, quite a bit of tension within the convention. Because what does it mean to be credibly accused? You know? I mean, Dave, you worked in education. I worked in ministry. All you got to have sometimes is just somebody saying, hey, they touched me. And boom, you're done. You're over with. And so to have your name then put on a database, your ministry is kaput. It's gone. And so what does it mean? So you can imagine, at least half of those people in there are pastors. You got 9,000 preachers in there, and they're like, what if somebody just says something about me? I didn't even do anything. What if they get mad and they make up a total lie? So what does it mean to be credibly accused? That's something that's been of greatly debated. They try to put people's minds at ease. It would be those who are convicted of sexual abuse. It would be those who have been reported, and maybe they weren't convicted, but all the evidence pointed to it. Maybe they got off on a technicality or whatever. And then there's also, they talked about an investigation by a third party. And so they really try to put people's minds at ease about this database. I doubt that happened, put them at ease, but still, that was part of their response to all that. Now, let me just tell you from my standpoint, there are still a lot of concerns, and maybe some renewed concerns, where this whole idea of how the convention is responding to this idea of sexual abuse and the report that came out, this explosive report that came out. I did a full report on that last year, and I don't want to go into it all again because I've done it once, and I can refer you back to that at another time. The problem is that there were instances of sexual abuse that the report that these reports made it to people who were high up in the convention. They were presidents or part of the executive committee, and these reports got to them, and they weren't handled the way that people thought they should have been handled. That's really the bulk of this whole issue. Now, so there are some concerns about how we are addressing that now. Concerns from my end, and let me just share with you those real quick. Number one is the cost of what it is that we're trying to do. We have retained a third party that costs millions of dollars. The upkeep of even the things that I talked about, the website, this database, the investigation, all of that kind of stuff, all of those cost a great deal of money, to the point where there are certain, I have to confess, I don't know if it was an official convention review or if it's somebody within the convention who hired people to look at where the direction we were heading and the amount of money that we were spending, and the words that they used was that this is unsustainable. Meaning that all the money that we have going, all the money that we give into the convention to go toward missions and all that kind of stuff is going to be eaten up in addressing it the way that it's being addressed. And we will be financially, it's unsustainable. We just can't do it, not for long. And so we're going to have to find a different way to address it. And that's the reason that I really voted for the president who lost, was because he had better ways of certainly effectively addressing it, but ways that were not going to bankrupt us. And so hopefully those things are being, the financial part of that is being investigated and addressed, and will be reported back to us in the near future. Also, another concern is the connection with Guidestone. Guidestone is the one who did the report last year, who was hired 2 years ago to do that report and presented that report. Guidestone has been, they're good at what they do, but they have had connections with the homosexual movement, the LBG. I don't know all the letters. I don't know. I'm not making fun of them. I'm making fun of the moniker, because even the people who put the moniker together don't know how to handle the moniker. They go LGBTQ plus because they don't know. I mean, every day there's something being added to it. So whatever all that is, I'm just going to call it the homosexual movement. They've come out in affirmation of the homosexual movement, and if their views on sexuality are so vastly different than the biblical viewpoint and the viewpoint of Southern Baptists, then how are we going to have them looking into this issue of sexual abuse? You can see that that's kind of a crazy thing. So not only that, but there are questions about the reliability of their report. I know specifically of instances where people had verifiable proof to refute some of the things that came out in their report last year, and they have refused to acknowledge that information and change their report. So it kind of casts shadows on some of the things that they did report, when maybe it shouldn't, if they would come and verify that, some of this information. So that's kind of That raises some concerns there. Also, where this, not only the connection with Guidestone, not only the cost, but there's a continued black eye that is put upon our convention that is perpetuated by some in leadership. Meaning that there is when the culture that we're in, because of the nature of the report, there is a certain, what's the word? Stigma that is placed upon the convention by the culture, and you are seen, you are really vilified if you don't embrace that stigma. You know what I mean? And so the response by our president, our current president, as well as others who are high up in the convention, is to embrace that stigma. And I don't believe that it's fair. The reason I don't believe it's fair is that this is an issue for the local church. This is not an issue primarily for the convention's hierarchical board, because we don't have a hierarchical board. I'll explain that in just a few minutes. These are things that have gone on in the local church, and the convention needs to be addressing it on a local level. That's how we need to be handling this. That not only would, it will certainly help with the cost. It's not because of the cost. It would help with that, but it's because that's where the problem is. We are a convention of autonomous churches. We are not the way that we have embraced what the media has portrayed us like would tell the whole world that we are structured like the Catholic Church or the Episcopalian Church or the Methodist Church, and we are nothing like them. We are a churches of independent churches. We are a convention of independent churches, and it needs to be addressed in that way. But we have instead, since somebody has heaped that upon us, this is a convention full of a bunch of child molesters. That is not the case at all, and it is unfair. And the problem is again, if the media were to get a hold of this, not that they care about what Lane Sanders has to say, but if they did, I would be vilified for denying it or whatever. I'm not denying that this stuff has taken place. What I'm denying is it does not cast a shadow, or does not. The convention is not at fault, because the convention is simply a bunch of different churches. The issue is at the church level. If this was a problem with every church, with every convention president, or everybody who's hired by the convention or whatever, that might be one thing. But this is an issue that has been found within the local church, and that's where it needs to be addressed. But and so that brings to the last thing. My last concern with all this is a misunderstanding of church polity, of how we are structured. The way that it happens is you got a bunch of churches that come together. I think we're at 47,000 churches. 47, just wrap your brain around that. Around the world, 47,000 churches. We come together once a year to a convention, and that's where the decisions are made. That's where we vote on stuff and all that kind of stuff. Now, we can't vote on every single thing. We can't vote on day-to-day operations. We can't do that. So we go home, and I came home last week. We come home and we go about our business, and there's what they call the executive committee. The executive committee is made up, it is voted by the convention, by the churches that come together, and it's made up of 70, 80 individuals, and they're the ones who they meet together every few months, and they make decisions on day-to-day operations, and then there is a handful of convention employees that carry out the wishes of the executive committee. That's how we're structured. And so we don't have and by the way, every church is autonomous. So the executive committee can't tell Emmanuel Baptist Church what to do. They can't tell us, you got to have some policies and procedures in place, or else they can't do that. They can't come together and say, you have to have a full-time pastor, or you have to get rid of Lane Sanders, or they can't do that. They don't have any authority to tell us to do that. We get to do whatever we want to do. That's when I'm going through our new members class here at the church. I say that we're a part of the Southern Baptist Convention, but yet we are autonomous. That's the beauty of the Southern Baptist Convention. We own our own buildings. We determine our own programs. We can have Vacation Bible School or not. We got Vacation Bible School going on this week, for those of you who don't know. So there's no hierarchy that tells us what to do. That is the difference between us and every other denomination that's out there. And so it changes drastically, not only where the problem is, where the blame is, it also changes where the solution is and how you address it. There are certain limitations that we have as a convention, and there are also a lot of liberties that we have. It's just different. And so it has to be treated differently. And I can get into it longer, but then we'll be here forever, and that's not what you're after. So I just think that there are still a lot of concerns where our addressing of the sexual abuse issue is, and I think that some changes in leadership in the next couple of years are going to help us face that a little bit better than we have been. All right? We have any questions yet? Nothing online. Any questions in the room? Yes, sir.
About the Department of Justice or the feds or whatever investigating, did they say anything about that?
Okay, so the question is about the Department of Justice, and there was nothing that was said about their investigation of this whole issue within the convention. There was nothing that was said about that at the convention this year from the platform. There has been a lot of talk about that in discussions about how the convention needs to handle it. Right now, we are in full, surrender mode to what they're wanting to do and how they're wanting to investigate and those kinds of things. But again, they're investigating us like we're the Catholic Church, and that's part of the problem. So again, people who don't understand Southern Baptist life, they struggle with this, and we're just lumped in with everybody else, and it's just not fair. Because then you and I, as part of a Southern Baptist church, we're a bunch of child molesters, or else I am at least, because just like people look at priests with a certain distrust now. Look at me like that. It's just not fair. So nothing was said officially. That should have been a good question. I didn't really think about that leading up to that, because that was a point of discussion among people who were saying we need to change how our approach to the DOJ. Okay. Again, if you're just now logging in, which we've got about twice as many people as we started out with online, if you have any questions about anything that I've said or anything that I've not said about the convention, please feel free to type those in, and I'll do my best to address them, okay? Okay, and then let's see, I talked about that. Just two more things. One is just a point of order, but the other thing, probably, so the issue that really overshadowed as far as the amount of press and discussion that came about, because again, the sexual abuse was just a report, but what really became a point of discussion at the convention this year, and I didn't see this coming, was the issue of women pastors, females serving in the role of pastor within a Southern Baptist church. Now, that was an issue that was addressed last year, and I mentioned that before and after the convention, but it really became like a major thing this year when it came to not just the discussions on the floor, but there were resolutions, there were amendments, and all that kind of stuff that were presented before the body to vote for, that specifically was addressing this issue of women pastors. So let me just tell you where that kind of thing stands. And I've made this clear before as well, but the Bible simply speaks of men as pastors. It just does. I mean, you can like it or not. You can argue with it if you want, whatever. The Bible it really doesn't. It's not a whole lot of guesswork there, and it really is kind of funny, because I was talking with someone. I told him I'm not going to throw him under the bus, but they were like, they said, well, I know the Bible says that only men are supposed to be pastors, but like, what is the big deal? And then they caught themselves and they're like, oh, wait. And so it was really kind of a funny discussion. But I told them I wouldn't throw their name out there, and so I won't. But so that is simply a biblical stance that the convention has decided to stand on, and it's one that they have really, in light of some things I'm about to tell you about, have become have even had to take a stronger stand on because that was challenged. Again, when you come to a situation like this, when you come to an issue like this that is hotbed, it becomes a cultural issue, and one for the 21st century rather than the first century and those kind of things. People like to throw all that stuff in there. When those questions come up, that is when they need to be addressed. And so it's not that it's a more important issue than some other things. It's just the issue that is of the day that the convention felt that it needed to speak on. And so there really isn't a whole lot of question about what the Bible has to say. It's people want to question, is that relevant to the 21st century? And of course, I guess different people are going to answer that different ways, but we have said it is an issue. It transcends time. The Bible, just like in other issues, it transcends time, and it says what it says. And we believe that it is inerrant, it is infallible, and it is authoritative. And so that, with that being said, then probably the most contentious thing that occurred, was that based upon what began last year, at last year's convention, was specifically 3 different churches, specific to this issue, 2 different churches that were brought before the convention as to whether or not they should be ousted from the convention because of this issue, because they had women pastors. And one of those was a Flat Creek church in Texas, I think, something like that. And in both of in these cases where this ousting took place, the churches that were in question had 3 minutes to defend themselves, and then the executive committee, who was bringing the motion forward to do so, was given. They were allowed to have a spokesman to give 3 minutes in favor of removing them from the convention, and then the body voted. That's how it went. And so my concern, I knew which way the vote was going to go. I just knew. My concern is that those people who were in favor of removing them from the convention, that they would be rude, because it did happen some last year. Booing whenever somebody disagreed with them, or raising their voice or whatever. That was my concern. I wasn't concerned about whether or not we're going to stand on the word, blah, blah, blah. Some people were concerned about that, please. As a convention, I knew where we were going, but my concern was the attitude with which we would go there. And so it's in that light that I was saying it was uneventful, that when these people stood up to give their case for staying in the convention, they were not interrupted or anything like that. They were listened to. They were given their fair shake. Nobody laughed when it was over. Nobody laughed last year either. But so anyway, it was a good thing. It was handled the way that it should have been. They were given a voice. Their voice was respectfully listened to, but they were voted out. But the biggest thing about that was probably that one of the churches that was voted out was the biggest church in the entire convention. If you've ever read The Purpose-Driven Life, y'all probably haven't read The Purpose-Driven Church. I thought it was better myself, but anyway. That was written by Rick Warren out of Saddleback Church out in California. That's the church. That's the other church that was let go. And he gave an impassioned speech last year. He gave an impassioned speech this year. He was really kind of arrogant when he did it, just to be honest, which was kind of disappointing. I went to a conference of his back in '99 flew out to California, went to it. It was good. He was good. I thought a lot of him, but he really kind of has been kind of let down here in the last, as he's retired. That's the thing, he's retired. But he had a woman pastor who came in to take his place, a husband and wife pastor who came in to take his place. In one of their satellite campuses, they installed a woman pastor. So, it was pretty clear he's doing this in violation of what we said we believe in the Baptist Faith and Message, the year 2000. It's not like it's a surprise. He knew the way that it was going to go, and yet he did it anyway, So, I don't know. I've got a lot of opinions about that, but anyway, that was one of the things that took place, and probably the most controversial thing, that we stood on the Bible. That's kind of how it goes. If the homosexual issue comes up again and we stand on the Bible, that's going to be controversial too. It's kind of how it happens. All right, questions about that? Questions? Okay, well, the last thing we'll throw out there is that next year's convention is going to be June the 9th through the 12th. 2024 will be in Indianapolis this year, which is held there a good bit. But the reason they have to keep going back to some of the same places is because there are only so many places, conventions halls in the United States that can hold the, 15,000 people, 20,000 people. So, yeah. Okay. Any questions online? Any questions in the room at all? Okay. Well, yes, ma'am.
A pastor becomes a missionary. Is that something that the church elects them to do, or they just voluntarily do it?
Okay, so a missionary through the Southern Baptist Convention?
Yes.
Okay, so what she's asking you is it something that they, how did you word it again? Is it something that they,
Is it something that the convention chooses that pastor, or the pastor just volunteer, or just?
okay, so she's asking if, to go through the IMB, does a pastor volunteer, or is the pastor chosen by the convention? So, it's a great question. And it kind of, part of that is, it comes back to how we're structured. And that is that we are independent churches, and so no, there is not, you don't have any kind of a board. Even though we have an international mission board, they don't have the authority to go seek out a pastor and say, hey, you're going to be on the mission board. That's not how it works. Not only that, but it really doesn't have to be a pastor. Like if Chris back here wanted to go on the mission field, and he wanted to go to be a missionary in Uganda or whatever, he would come forward to us as a church body, and he'd say, hey, I want to go to Uganda. I'm a pastor. I'd sign off on it. And we would contact the IMB, the International Mission Board, and he would go to their training facility in order to be funded by the International Mission Board, which is the point of going through us. To be funded by them, he would have to go to their training center, probably spend 3 to 6 months there being trained on how to do that. And then he would he would be sent out to his mission field. He would be supported by the International Mission Board, which again is the beauty of the Southern Baptist Convention. Southern Baptist Convention is the greatest missionary organization that has ever been established, because we pool all of our resources, and all of our resources pulled together sends those missionaries out. It supports them. So that if Chris were a missionary in a Methodist church or an independent Baptist church or whatever, he would have to go raise his funds. He would have to go find different churches who would support him and send him money every month. You don't have to do that in the Southern Baptist Convention. The Southern Baptist Convention, once we send you, the IMB is the one supporting you the whole time. You don't have to come back and raise more funds or any of that kind of stuff. You don't have to have it. So it's just the greatest missionary organization in the world. That's why we do it. But so I hope that answers your question. A person volunteers; they feel called of God. The church recommends them to the IMB. The IMB goes through the screening process as well as the training process, and they go out from there.
And how long do they usually be missionaries?
Until
God leads them in another direction?
That's right. Or until health concerns, and the question, by the way, if you're listening online, how long do they serve? And there are like journeyman programs where somebody is intentionally in it for 2 years. It's called the journeyman program. And it kind of gives them a taste of this is what it would be like if you did this as a career, forever. And so you got some people who go off, they do it for 30, 40 years. You got some people who do it for 6 months, and they're just like, this isn't for me. But that doesn't happen very often because, again, they go through this vetting process and all that, and so they're able to pinpoint people who it's probably not for them, but still. Good question. Anybody else? That it? Any online? Don't see any online. Okay. All right. What about prayer requests? If you got any prayer requests, go ahead and put those in the comment section, and we'll pray for those specifically tonight. Y'all think of some. Candace, do we have any that have come in advance? No emails or anything like that?
We do have one, I believe his name is John, and I left it sitting on my desk.
Okay.
But he was doing yard work and had a fire burning the debris, and the fire came back up on him.
Oh my
and
goodness.
He has some 3-degree burns, and yeah, he's in Augusta. So
Okay. Yeah, they've got a good burn center there. I know.
Right.
Wow. Okay. Let's pray for Pam Leafy's mom. She's kind of going through it right now, and Betty McGinnis. I think they're both in the care of family members' homes. So, be in prayer for them. Any others? Any in the room?
Young family,
You want to?
the young family.
Okay, young family. All right.
family of John Comer, I believe he passed away. Is that?
John Comer. All right. Seems like I had one other one that I wanted to bring up. Oh goodness, what was it?
VBS.
Yes, VBS. We still have 2 days left in Vacation Bible School. Pray for the volunteers, but also pray for the kids. Oh my goodness, there was somebody that I was talking to that was. Anyway, all right. Well, let's go to God in prayer, and you pray for the one that I can't remember. Okay, I think God could probably remember it better than I could, so you be in prayer for that. All right, let's pray. God, we thank you for the church and the encouragement that we get and the family that we have and all that. Just through the establishment of the church, we recognize that as a gift from you, and it's made by you, and it's made for you. I pray that our church would function as you designed, as you envisioned in Ephesians chapter 4, and that we would always function in that way. And Lord, also we just have to thank you that we can come in partnership with 47,000 other churches to fulfill the Great Commission, to do what it is that you've called us to do. And so, Lord, as we think about that, it kind of boggles the mind, but we also just thank you that we're not in it alone, and that the body of Christ is functioning as such. But of course, as you bring that many churches and that many preachers and that many people together, there is bound to be issues and things that have to be faced and dealt with, and problems. We're all bringing in our collective fallenness together, and so sometimes we don't get things right, and sometimes it's kind of a painful process to get to where we're getting them right. So in those cases, we do thank you for your word that guides us and that instructs us, tells us how it ought to be, and I pray that at least the convention that we're a part of would always be established on that word, knowing that it is from you, and so therefore it cannot be wrong, and it transcends times and opinions and cultures and practices of man. So just help us to stand on that and to do so boldly. Lord, you know the problems that we face as a convention, and I pray that you'd give us the wisdom and the patience and the love to work through those things together. Lord, you also know On a smaller scale, the same thing is true at Emmanuel Baptist Church and every other church that is represented by those who are listening to this. So, so just help us to move together to do what it is you've called us to do so that we can accomplish your will. And then also, not only are we bringing our collective fallenness, we're also bringing our collective concerns. And we've only mentioned a few here tonight, but we know that there are so many more. But there are those who are facing end of life, people who are facing some just a lot of health issues, and we know that you know about all those, and you are able to do something, and you still do. I believe you still do. So whether it's through your miraculous hand or through doctors and nurses and medicine, we pray that you bring healing where that is called for. And if not, then I pray that you give strength to people as they face the things that they face. And there's so much more than just physical things that we face. There are emotional issues that we have. There are people who are depressed, people who are facing financial woes and uncertainty. There are people who have doubts, and we just have struggles. And so just walk with us through our struggles. Thank you that you'll never leave us or forsake us. God, thank you for your love for us. Thank you for giving us time together tonight. And we look forward to getting back together again on Sunday. May our worship be, we do want it to speak to us, but give us the mindset where mainly we want it to speak to you, and we want you to be pleased by it. So may that happen, and bring us with the right hearts to see it happen. In Jesus' name, amen. My friend is his name is Tim. He's a pastor up where I moved from, and Tim, he's still pastoring, but he found out in October he'd been having some pain in his leg, and he thought maybe he ruptured a tendon or something like that, just something crazy. And because he does a lot of manual labor, and so he went to the doctor after about a year. He got to where he couldn't walk hardly, so he went to the doctor. Found out he had cancer. He had cancer in his kidney, and it was in his pelvis, and it was in his lung and on his spine. It was everywhere. It was kind of crazy. So anyways, it's stage 4. He's addressing it. He's still pastoring, but he can't really do any other work. So he's in good spirits. He sounded just like he always did when I was up there. But it was good to connect with him. But you just be in prayer for Tim, and yeah, I'm sure that he will. I'm sure that he'll appreciate that. So, all right, y'all have a great rest of the week, and we'll see y'all Sunday, if not sooner.